Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Patricia Kranz, the Executive Director of the Overseas Press Club, and we are delighted tonight to welcome the winners of the Joe and Laurie Dine Award, the Reuters Venezuela Bureau, for their series of articles titled Maduro's Venezuela, which shed light on a system of violence, corruption, and the machinery of repression aided by international partners. And the moderator is the head judge of that award, Anya Schiffrin, who is a senior lecturer at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs. And they will talk for about 30 minutes. At any time, you can put your questions in the chat room. And after about half an hour, we'll take the questions. And I'm delighted now to hand it over to Anya.
And I will unmute. Great. Patricia, thank you so much for hosting this event tonight. I've been helping judge the Overseas Press Club Awards for years now. I'm not even sure how many years. And it's really one of the highlights of my year. It's unbelievably impressive and emotional and searing to read the remarkable work done by brave journalists working around the world. Over the years, I've had many of my students read the applications and the different samples. And really, actually, the Overseas Press Club Awards inspired my two books, Global Muckraking and African Muckraking. And we used some of your runners-up and some of your winners in those books. They're compendium of reporting in the Global South. I always wish you could put all of your applicants on your website, because the stories are incredible and it's so hard every year to make a decision. I think for our panel last year, and Ali Bethel, Rebecca Chow is now with the New York Times, Mai Lin Nguyen from Open Society Foundation, and Matt Schiavenza from the Asia Society were the judges this year. And really, it was a very difficult choice, as it always is. But I think the reporting on Venezuela, the photography, the multimedia, and the writing, as well as the investigation and the research, was extraordinary. I felt after I'd read those pieces that I really understood the full horror of what has gone wrong in Venezuela over decades. You covered military and police brutality, repression, corruption in the development projects, and the horrible brutality of day-to-day life, and the staring inequality, which of course there was so much inequality and poverty when Chavez came, which was inexcusable in such an oil-rich country. And instead of improving things, they've gotten much, much worse, under Chavez and then under Maduro. So it's really been a terrible situation. And I would love to start just by asking Brian and Angus to tell us a little teeny bit about yourselves. Who are you and how did you wind up in Caracas, and how did you report these stories? Because they were clearly very dangerous to report, and as well as all the investigation that you did using documents and sealed court records or unsealed court records, you also went out and interviewed a lot of people. And your colleagues took photos as well. So I'd love to just hear about yourselves and what it was like to report that unbelievably depressing and sobering and important package of stories.
Sure. Yeah, I can start. I've been in Venezuela since 2001. I sort of came here by accident and stumbled into the media business, and have been working for Reuters since 2006. And it's a fascinating place to work. Got its challenges, obviously, but I guess if we're a normal place, then the world wouldn't be that interested in it. We spent a lot of last year just looking at different things that were going on. And then last year was a very, let's say, dynamic year. I would say it's probably the moment when global interest in Venezuela just absolutely spiked. And there was a lot of interest in these things. And there was this sort of very deep conviction, which did not turn out to be true, that the military was going to intervene and there was going to be a change of government. So that motivated a lot of the reporting. At the same time, there was a lot of just increasing noise about the human rights situation and what was going on overall in terms of both police abuse on the military side, inequality, hunger. And that's where a lot of these things came together. So it was an effort by the entire bureau. Myself and Angus are here tonight, but we have this entire range of things to report on, and Angus took very closely to the investigative beat, and I'll let Angus take it from there if you want to describe a little bit of what you ended up working on.
Yeah, sure. So I first moved to Venezuela in May 2018. I think before then I was working for Reuters in Spain, and I think even then I was kind of slightly obsessed about with Venezuela. I would kind of read everything that the bureau would produce. So it was anyway. And then the opportunity came to move to Caracas, and it was just in time for the May 2018 presidential election, in which Maduro, of course, went on to win. And I think right from that moment, I was kind of fascinated in the issues of how, in a country with so much poverty and insecurity and dysfunction, how could Maduro's government keep on kind of retaining control. And yeah, I set out to kind of to explore the different mechanisms which Maduro's state had developed to ensure that its control over all aspects of the country would continue. And that led me to look at the military counterintelligence agency, which was kind of spreading fear through the military community, kind of using torture and using torture to keep soldiers in check. It led me to look at this police death squad, which the government had tasked to effectively kind of keep the poor shut up in their houses and out of the streets, and also to look at how lucrative actually some of the corruption which the government involved in actually was, which I think helped to explain why the government was indeed so interested in kind of keeping hold of power.
So often when we look at investigative journalism, there's that feeling of frustration afterwards that the incredible stories here don't have as much impact as they should. And I was wondering, after this package was published, which was over several months in 2019, what happened? Was there outrage? Can the international community do anything? Or are you in more what I sometimes refer to as, the sort of bearing witness kind of investigative journalism, where you're doing careful documentation for sort of future generations? But did anything happen afterwards? I imagine things have gotten worse.
I picked the latter on that one. The government's typical response to a solidly reported investigative story is silence. It is very rare to see an investigative report of any nature by Reuters or anyone else lead to the dismissal of a minister or a change of any major reorganization. I mean, these things happen anyway, but they generally happen for different reasons. The government does like to make a lot of noise about what might be considered sort of more gossipy kind of stuff, the kinds of things that come up on Twitter, or something that is really maybe not very well sourced. Those are the kinds of things they really want to hold up and say, this is outrageous, how could someone say this? When you really do your homework, they usually just don't say anything. And I think, particularly in a society so closely involved in social media, there's become this, people are accustomed to reading tweets, and reading a full investigation to really respond to it doesn't happen that much. I don't know, Angus, if that was, it's been my experience at least. I don't know if, Angus, you thought the government was really responsive to.
I think the only proper comment I've ever got from the government was to be called, I think, slanderous and insulting by the information minister, and yeah, and that's about it. But I think
which went into the story, if I'm not mistaken.
It did, yeah. But I mean, I think our work has been, it's been referenced by the UN and its reports, and obviously by everybody kind of seeking to highlight the repressive forces which Maduro controls. But yeah, in terms of, I think, actually changing something on the government side, I have read somewhere that the government has started to kind of to at least try to restrain this particular death squad slightly. But I think, but equally, I mean, I think that they've attracted a lot of it. They've attracted a lot of attention from the UN and various NGOs, just because I think they've been kind of the most kind of overtly kind of horrific aspects of the government the government's kind of repression in recent years.
So it sounds like from what you're saying that international pressure doesn't actually do much.
Well, no, I think, well, they seem to be stronger than ever at the moment. So I think
yeah, and you documented really well the ties with Cuba and all the help that they got in building their repressive apparatus as well, and the training, right? That was one of the pieces in the series that we read, was about the Cuban help and support for Venezuela.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that was something that had always been, it was kind of it was known in a kind of gossipy manner. And indeed, the government didn't hide the fact that they had, that they had kind of Cuban advisors on the ground. And obviously kind of Chavez and Fidel Castro were very close. But I think, I wanted to find kind of, the documentary proof that actually kind of showed the extent to which the Cubans were involved in teaching this unit called the DIHESIM, which is the kind of the military counterintelligence unit. How the Cubans taught this unit to kind of seek out soldiers who could pose some sort of threat to Maduro's rule.
Bill Holstein's asking if you can tell us, who supported Maduro the most? China, Russia, Cuba, or if we can't quantify it, do you want to talk a little bit about the support that they've given Maduro and why? Oil, I assume.
Brian, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so all of them in different ways. The relationship with China was built, my understanding or my belief was that Chinese planners, economic planners in the early aughts were looking at their economy and saying we have to stitch up a supply of oil. So they developed this kind of convergent political and economic and energy strategy whereby they lent money to the Chavez government and Chavez government played back into oil. And that funneled a lot of money into Venezuela. And it did start to spread as a result of these things. You'd see Chinese products around, there's Chinese cars you'll see on the street and different types of Chinese phones. But basically, once the oil markets collapsed, the Chinese weren't interested anymore. And Venezuelans owe them a bunch of money, but I don't think they particularly care. I think it was a bit like an insurance policy that they needed. The Chinese have basically disappeared. They still have rhetorical and political support. They are not interested in putting money in here. The Russians came in later, and the Russians basically began trading crude. Not obviously, they don't need oil. The Russians have plenty of it, but they are helping in different ways, particularly when the sanctions came in moving crude around. And they are also not interested in actually putting money on the ground. There's no evidence of that. They also do provide rhetorical support because that sort of renewed Cold War we have. And the Cubans have been very much what's constantly pointed to as the intelligence agencies, which is what Angus's story was about. it's very hard to pin down what the Cubans are. There's so many apocryphal tales, and I would guess a lot of it's true, but it's also difficult to really pin down who has done what. And there is the sense that the Cubans are so good at intelligence that without them, the military would not have the same sort of social control. I think that's entirely plausible. And the Cubans are known for being fantastically good at intelligence. They continue to function sort of in that role. They didn't have quite, at the height of the Cuba-Venezuela relationship, there were doctors here and there were, large, shipments of oil. That's definitely kind of tamped down a little bit, but that relationship is still there. And the Cubans are sort of these ghosts that float around. There's rumored to be Cuban colonels in this or that spot. And most folks have, a lot of folks in the military have heard stories or have stories about, we heard Cuban accents in these different places. And I think it's quite plausible. But there isn't really, the United States wants to kind of pressure both at the same time. So there's not really much changing there. But as for actual presence, I don't think anyone really wants to be here. It's not working very well.
How do you pin down what's rumor and what's fact? I imagine that international trade statistics, are they reliable, or energy export numbers? How do you go about doing all that investigation and documentation?
So that gets harder and harder as time goes on, because what sanctions do is, like anything that's made illegal, is it's pushed underground. So, drugs are illegal in the United States. They're not particularly difficult to get. There's all sorts of clubs and sticks and threats being issued to people. Thou shalt not ever collect a cargo of crude from Venezuela. But of course they do. So we have two of our correspondents follow this very closely. And so there's this very interesting set of games that they'll play, is that they will, what they would first do is they would turn their communication systems off, so these tankers would go dark. Then they will actually invent new grades of crude. So a Venezuelan crude will arrive in Malaysia and it'll get turned into something else that doesn't exist, and it'll get sold to China. And everyone will say, "Wow, we know what you're talking about. That's not Venezuelan oil." They now will take tankers that are being actually literally broken apart and being pulled apart for scrap and are sitting somewhere on a coast of India, and the registry of that tanker says the tanker is actually in Venezuela. In other words, there are these identity games. So this is a little bit, it's kind of a whack-a-mole sort of strategy that, you chase after one group of people, and eventually, the business ends up in the hands of somebody else. So you can do some of that by following the actual physical movement of the tankers. But again, that gets harder and harder. So sometimes you have to rely on people who are literally at the port taking a picture. This is the name and the registry of the tanker that's there, which may not correspond to what it's telling the international, because there are, maritime traffic regulations that say, this is, how you're supposed to be communicating, and the same as air traffic control you would have, there's similar maritime control. So there's all these games being played in there. And sources, sometimes you get documents, sometimes you can see it. And you'll see PDVSA is the state oil company. They literally, it's like they have to create an entire set of shell networks to be able to sell a single cargo of oil. They have this trade with Iran, which Iran will try to bring in gasoline, and sometimes they'll leave with something else. So the United States is not at the stage where they're literally going to assault a cargo on the open water, because that's basically an act of war, but they'll do basically everything short of that.
This is reminding me so much of the unforgettable scene in King Leopold's Ghost, where Edie Morel is standing at the docks watching the ships come back from the Congo. Right? Do you remember that? Gosh, really, really detailed stuff. I was wondering, Angus, now you've got a new job in London covering financial crimes. And I was wondering, we have a question from the audience about drug dealing and to what extent the Maduro government is involved in drug trafficking. And I would sort of add, I was wondering if you have a sense of that. And also if you can talk to us a little bit about the money laundering and how all these sanctions are avoided. I mean, presumably there must be loads of international banks and companies that are complicit in helping all of this continue, right? The illegal oil exports or drug dealing, if they're involved.
I mean, so I think so. The kind of the allegations of kind of drug trafficking against the government are probably I think they're kind of the almost I think they're kind of holy grail of investigative reporting in Venezuela, in the sense that I think for years I think reporters have been looking for really kind of hard proof which implicates people at the very top level. And obviously, I think and this whole kind of slew of indictments coming out of the U.S. which have implicated pretty much everybody up to, including Maduro in the drug trade. And most of those indictments are based on testimony from kind of officials who defected from the kind of the Chavez or Maduro government, and went to the US and then told all to the Department of Justice. And there's also there's the key case of which Maduro's wife Celia Flores.
Oh. Hi.
So
you back?
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Sorry. Maduro's wife Celia Flores. Two of her nephews were arrested by the DEA. During a sting operation in Haiti, during which they were attempting to sell cocaine to undercover DEA agents. So and both of them were then convicted in the US. Actually, earlier this year, I tracked down a kind of former bodyguard for Celia Flores, Maduro's wife, who had been kind of extradited to the US a few years ago, kind of on drug trafficking charges, and he told me that she had been kind of apprised of her nephew's dealings in the drug world. And that's definitely, for me, that's kind of the closest I've ever been able to get in terms of finding a witness who can attest to the very kind of top level officials at least kind of awareness in what's going on. And then I think as you go down the command chain of the Venezuelan government, and you start looking more at the level of kind of troops in the military, or sailors in the Navy. I mean, a lot of them definitely are kind of facilitating local level kind of drug trafficking. I mean, mainly because obviously the rule of law is close to non-existence, and their salaries are so minute that I think any opportunity to earn more money is extremely welcome.
Thank you for that. You're getting lots of nice support in the chat from people who admire your work. And one of the questions is how dangerous is this for you both and for your colleagues? How, obviously won't have to go into details about your security protocol, but covering these kinds of things. How, are you in physical danger?
Brian could go first. I just have to open my front door.
Yeah. Everyone has had different types of security incidents that range from annoyances to things that can be scary. I think reporters are definitely in the line of fire in a country like this. I don't think that we are at the most danger. I think that the greatest danger is almost always to local reporters. The government is pretty systematic and methodical to focus on the ones who have the least sort of backing. So there's an investigative shop called Armando Info that broke a lot of stories about corruption. And they were effectively chased out of the country by understood to be by one of the people who was they were investigating, who is now in prison for violating U.S. sanctions, being held in Cape Verde. We have to be careful, and yeah, you always want to know who you're talking to on the other end. What sometimes you do have to talk to some rather sketchy characters. You have to know when and where to talk to them. And I don't know, Angus could add to this, but I also sometimes worry for the people we interview. And I know sort of, especially someone who's going to give you sensitive information, but I would also sometimes just worry about a person who is willing to identify themselves and say critical things of the government who might have a public sector job. As a journalist, you always want a person to, oh, here's my name and, this is what I do, and take a picture of me. And sometimes when you do that, you start to think, are you sure that you're going to say this and, you could get fired? A lot of times they'll say yes. Frequently, they don't want to. So yeah, I always appreciate, the concern for us. But my firm conviction is that people here right now, there's a journalist who used to be, he started working for a political party, and he's been a journalist for decades, and picked up and thrown in jail on some kind of terrorism charges, and then amid a cloud of sort of homophobic innuendo, and still there. So it's a difficult place in that sense. Yes. Angus, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I definitely going to completely agree that I think kind of the local Venezuelan reporters are kind of are at most risk. I mean, I think for international kind of foreign journalists like ourselves, obviously, you always run the risk of just kind of running afoul of kind of local local crime. Especially when we drive out to into the Venezuelan interior. A lot of these areas are they're either under control of kind of criminal groups, or you run into a military some group of soldiers who are really kind of no different, and they'll give you plenty of trouble. And obviously, I mean, there's also the additional challenges to reporting, there's barely any kind of public transport. You've got to bring all your gasoline with you. Supplies for a few days. But saying that, I think, what happens with foreign journalists, if they truly kind of run afoul of the government, is that the government will then just kick you out, kind of unceremoniously kind of kick you out.
Unfortunately, they will frequently kick out the foreign reporter, and then the local producers who no one has ever heard of can be stuck in prison for weeks, again, because there's a very clear cost benefit analysis to that. Sorry, Angus, go ahead. I just wanted to add that.
and just to kind of match Brian's comments about, I think, especially in terms of the reporting that I was doing kind of in tandem with my colleague kind of Sarah Kanosian on police violence. We were kind of extremely worried about any form of kind of retribution, again, being kind of carried out against against the kind of the families that were speaking to us. And even, you know, some, I mean, I remember some, you know, there was one place we returned to several times, and I think after the first or second time we went, you know, the family told us that, you know, the police had then showed up, and you know, and told them, you know, don't speak to these reporters, you know, or else. And, you know, I think, and the families were then telling us, no, you know, we want to speak out, because it's, you know, it's important to us to, you know, for the public to know what happened. And so it then becomes a kind of ethical, an ethical issue which you're going to have to wrestle with yourself. I mean, you know, that these people want their stories to be told, and sometimes, you know, they want names, or sometimes they do want their names to be kind of attached to these stories. But if something were to happen to them, then, you know, unfortunately that will be kind of on your shoulders. And, you know, indeed, actually, I think for a separate story, I mean, for one, there's a family who are kind of continuously being pursued, and I'm actually still paying for you know, for them to kind of shift location, kind of every now and again. So I think it is, you know, it just means that, you know, even when the story goes out, you know, it's still something that you have to, that, yeah, the story goes out, but it's not really the end, and, you know, you still have to kind of to protect the people that spoke with you.
Yeah, that you actually anticipated my next question, because when I worked in Vietnam, there was so often we were protecting the people that we interviewed, even when, as Brian said, you know, they were happy to tell their story and give their names. And often I just felt, you know, we really couldn't reveal that. Is there anything you can do to protect them after it's appeared? You just said, Angus, you have to go back and find out what happens after the story appears, or nothing.
I think, obviously, obviously you can keep in, I mean, I do think sometimes with journalism, there's a sense that the story comes out and you can just, you know, move on to the next project and just, you know, kind of forget about people. But, you know, I've found, you know, definitely just kind of keeping in touch with people, making sure that you're available for their, you know, any worries that they have. And, you know, and if they think that there is a kind of a credible threat against them, then, you know, either kind of putting them in touch with an NGO who might be able to help them, or indeed kind of paying, you know, or indeed kind of making sure that they can move to another location, you know, with their family, so they can be more secure.
Really a terrible situation, just awful, and just getting worse and worse over the years. Bill Holstein had a follow-up question to my earlier question, which is, I was sort of asking you about impact and the international community and, you know, who's complicit. And Bill's asking if there's anything Biden could do apart from sending in the Marines. I'm also curious about the role of the Catholic Church, because I saw in your articles about hunger and malnutrition that the Catholic Church was donating food, but that's, you know, that's not much of a, I mean, it's important, but that's obviously not going to bring about the systemic and structural change that's needed there.
Whoa, okay, yeah, a lot there. What can Biden do? I think it's a tough position for Biden, because on the one hand, I think it's pretty clear that the sanctions did not have the short-term impact that the Trump administration hoped they would, and in the sense that they would lead to a change of government. But at the same time, I think Biden is under a huge amount of pressure after results in Florida not to look like he's soft on this particular set of people. So what would he actually do? I mean, I'm not sure. It does feel like a stalemate in a lot of ways, and maybe the same question was being asked about Syria 6 or 7 years ago, and people just don't really talk about Syria anymore. It kind of falls into the background. I feel a little bit like Venezuela. The same thing could happen. Sending in the Marines, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think it'll happen. I also don't think it would help. As for the Catholic Church, yes, there's a group called Caritas, which is very important in the basic humanitarian on the ground work and a lot of the hunger related work. They're not the only ones. But the Catholic Church as an institution does have some sort of history of conflict with the government, and it has its own politics. I would say churches in general are institutions that are very important in supporting communities and countries like this, very, very Catholic country, that continues to be important. But it is, the humanitarian aid situation is still very complicated. I don't know, your thoughts, Angus, on?
Actually, I haven't really done that much reporting on the on the Catholic Church's role. So yeah.
Or on any of that?
No. I'll trust you. I'll trust your opinions on the Biden administration.
Well, I'd love to hear a bit of thank you for that. And obviously it's immensely complicated. If it were easy, it would have been solved years ago, right? This is huge mess. Brian, you're still there, and I would love to know, could you bring us up to date, sort of what's happened since your last, those stories that we read in 2019? What happened with COVID? Have more people been able to leave? Obviously the countries nearby that people have fled to. I remember one of your stories talked about 4 million people had left. I'm sure it's more by now. They're all having to deal with COVID as well, which has been a huge problem in Latin America. What's happened since in Venezuela and to the migrants?
So 2019 was a year when there was a surge and kind of this euphoric groundswell the first sort of 6 months of the year, and this belief that that the government was going to change. That didn't happen. That meant that there's a lot of energy lost in the street, and there was a lot of interest internationally. People got tired of the story. One Washington Post columnist described it as I think the phrase was a junkie story is always too long. Is that this was this kind of cycles of bad decisions and people not being able to take advantage of the moment. And you could just see the traffic on internet sites had to do with Venezuela, just dove off a cliff. So all of those things conspired to then, people did not have quite the same level of mobilization. The result of COVID was that a lot of people who were, particularly in Colombia, which is where the biggest portion of the diaspora lived, the kinds of jobs they were doing were a lot of street-related work and selling stuff on the street, that kind of thing. The whole thing just dried up because they went into lockdown, and a lot of people came back. That started to maybe 100,000 or so. That started to turn around the other way about 2 or so months ago because things weren't changing in Venezuela and things were starting to open back up in Colombia again. The COVID situation here, it's really hard to know what's going on. The information is very tightly controlled and the testing is constrained. So you don't know how many tests there are. I mean, it's a bit the same problem that happens everywhere, is you don't know exactly what the numbers are with respect to what the actual incidence of, it definitely is, sometimes comes across as almost convenient, as the government doesn't have gasoline anymore, doesn't have these things to do, so let's just shut the whole thing down. A lot of it was really shut down anyway. So it has, if you ask me how people are getting by, the honest truth is I don't know. It's exceptionally difficult. I mean, an average public servant is going to make $2, $3 a month, and that's not going to buy you maybe buy you a carton of eggs, something like that. Maybe a day's worth of groceries would be a lot for that. So people are doing other things. And one of the things you're seeing is you go into a barrio and everywhere, every street corner, somebody's selling something. And that's, it's, people are moving and they're reinventing themselves. But at the same time, I genuinely don't know how people do it.
We have a question from the audience about sort of foreign currency. How are they getting their foreign currency? And Angus, I don't know if you feel like this is more one for you, because there's a comparison here with North Korea's Room 39.
I haven't heard of North Korea's 39.
Sorry?
I haven't. Is North Korea's Room 39 infamous? I actually haven't heard of it.
So I have neither had I, and I checked that good old Wikipedia, which said it's a secretive North Korean party organization that seeks ways to maintain the foreign currency slush fund for the country's leaders. I'm guessing the way that they get foreign currency in Venezuela is all those oil exports, but I didn't know if there's anything else you wanted to add to answer this question.
I mean, at the moment, I'm not sure there would be a single kind of government slush fund. I don't think they're really organized enough for that. But obviously, I think an easy way to kind of look at kind of the structure of Venezuela is almost like, just competing kind of fiefdoms, and each politician has his own kind of structure around him, in which they'll have various ways of obtaining hard currency, because obviously they don't, they earning bolivares is not a priority. So I think for every official that could be a little bit different. Maybe it's drug trafficking or kind of illegal or exporting gold mined in the jungle, or it's fleecing kind of oil or it's fleecing oil tankers that come to fill up in the ports. Even I think there's Bitcoin mining operations. I think they get incredibly creative at their ways of obtaining hard currency. I think you're muted.
Thank you. Angus, since you've, last couple questions. Angus, since you've left, are there any stories you wish you'd done? Any stories that got away you weren't able to do while you were in Venezuela?
Well, as I said, I think I definitely still plan to keep tabs on Venezuela, and hopefully make it back in future. I can't, but definitely, I think, as I said, I think finding extremely solid proof that the very top level of government officials are complicit in the drug trade. I think that would be kind of a Venezuelan reporter's dream, I think.
Well, I'm really glad to know you're on the case.
But equally, they're not. These people aren't idiots. It's unlikely to ever find a top minister posing in front of a warehouse full of I don't know, cocaine. Obviously, they have intermediaries and surrogates and the like.
Yeah, and Angus, we're also getting questions. Last question for you before I give Brian a question about the business community. Who are they? What about all those people in the 70s and 80s? Are they?
Haley, there's only this stuff. There's no. You can't have the whole thing. Only.
Angus, I was asking about the business community. Sorry,
so what role does the business community have?
Yeah, and somebody was asking these are from the audience. What happened to all those businessmen from Venezuela in the 70s and 80s that used to travel, and where, what is the business community now? I'm guessing that a lot of people went into exile in Miami. People, that's a question about the business community. Who are they? What are they doing? Where are they?
Yeah, I think you'd find that a majority of those people kind of fled, quite a long time ago to Miami, Spain, Colombia. I always thought, but even when I first moved to Caracas, I was always surprised that in Caracas there is there is a kind of a bubble of wealth there, which I think has kind of been. I think everywhere, at least whilst I was there, I felt that it was kind of consistently shrinking, kind of getting smaller and smaller. But I think the kind of the depiction in the media sometimes can just be a kind of an image of kind of just nationwide kind of suffering, and it's not like that. There is extreme inequality there, and for a tiny minority, and especially in Caracas, there are luxurious restaurants and bars and country clubs and so for a select few who've found ways to profit from the current environment, I think it's there's still a community there. I don't know if Brian wants to add anything.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. There is a new, I would say, emergent business class that some of them are independent entrepreneurs and some of them are people one might suspect to be linked to the government. That's always a difficult thing to report on. And to be fair, it's not the first time that sort of process has happened, is that these businessmen you're talking about from the 70s and 80s, yeah, some of them were independent entrepreneurs, but a lot of them did use contacts in the government to get to where they were. Yeah, I would say Miami's one place to look, but a lot have gone to Spain, a lot have gone to Colombia. And the business that you can do is now reduced to basically the folks who can get dollars. And everybody else, it's a little bit like an economy that's shrunk to the size of Haiti. So you still have the kind of bubble that Angus talks about where, there's, there's actually a government-owned hotel at the top of the mountain outside Caracas that is famous for having these casino tables. And this is my son. He wanted to say hello. You want to say hello?
Hello.
Hello. There he is. Okay. He said he's going to be the son of honor. There's just a massive scandal not long ago. This government-owned hotel, they were taking IV drip bags and using that to run cranberry juice into a high-end rum, and this made the waves all over social media as kind of this example of here's a government-run organization by a government called itself Socialist Party. That's probably a $20 cocktail or something like that, in addition to the outrage generated by putting cranberry juice into high-end rum. It's the whole bubble it's just such a small group of people, right? And somebody can work for them. But if it's not them, there's not really much business to be done here.
Yeah, it's a wretched, corrupt regime. I don't know that left or right has even that much to do with it anymore. It seems like it's power and wealth rather than ideology. Does that sound about right?
I mean, I think the ideology disappeared quite a while back just because there was not money to finance it anymore. So particularly the process that we saw last year is after these very rigid sort of structures and price controls, and only these people can move hard currency, they sort of pulled the plug on the whole thing. And in some ways it did help, but it also came at a point where the country was so destitute that it's just very hard for that to really take root. And the sanctions do make it difficult. People don't want to do business here. You asked about hard currency. How do they get it? The banks don't work with Venezuela anymore. You cannot transfer from an account in the United States to here. No one will do it for you. So those things do sort of all come in together into play.
You think there was an optimistic person in the Q&A, and I think we'll make this the last question, saying, will all dictatorships come to an end? How will this end? I don't know that all dictatorships come to an end any longer, more quickly than anything else. I don't know, but I would love to know, obviously you report, not predict, but do you have predictions about where this is going to go or how this will finish?
Well, you could have asked this about Omar al-Bashir in Sudan. Why did he last for 35 years and however many years it was? And why did he leave? I'm not an expert on it, but I understand the intelligence officer tapped him on the shoulder and said, Mr. Bashir, this way, please. I think it had to do with there was some international conflicts that came up there. I think that's sort of the important thing, and maybe the difficult thing that people have to walk away from, is that things don't happen when they should happen. There is not a clear line of, if the country gets this bad, then the government will have to. And we've seen this mistake get made over and over again by investors believing something's going to happen, politicians believing something's going to happen, business leaders believing something's going to happen. And what's the catalyst? No, I'm not gonna make a prediction on that. I mean, I certainly hope for better days for the country, but there aren't formulas for this.
No, I think that's absolutely right. Again, thinking back to Vietnam, which is obviously in no way comparable, but I remember the World Bank and the IMF saying you're going to run out of foreign currency and you're going to do this, you're going to do that. And none of that happened. They found ways to keep going. And later the World Bank, I remember, said, well, they're muddling through, but they did. They muddled through and they returned to economic growth. I thought this was remarkably interesting. You gave us a real picture of how people are living day to day and difficult that is, the difficulties of reporting and documenting what's going on, the sort of sad lack of, international attention, I think right now is particularly because of COVID, and the sort of big picture look at who the players are and what's happening. So thank you very much, both of you, for your time. This
Thanks
was
so much. And yeah,
remarkable.
thanks for the Bureau as well, to all the work everyone else did to make these stories happen.
Please congratulate your colleagues
definitely.
because they did a wonderful job. Really
Absolutely.
unforgettable package of stories. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Anya, for moderating. And it was an incredible discussion of the difficulties of doing this kind of reporting. And kudos to you for winning your award and continuing to move on and doing more of similar reporting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.